Hello everybody, and welcome to Chapter 11 of our Python 3 Basics tutorial series. In this video we're going to be building on the last video, which was functions, and in this video we're going to be adding function parameters. Basically what parameters are kind of like an extended variable, and it allows developers to create a function, put in function parameters, and this allows the programmer that is using the function to kind of customize the function itself. So let's say, for example, we're going to make a simple calculator, for example. So let's do define addition, and to do this addition we're going to have number 1 and num2, and then we round it off with a colon, and then we add our code. So addition is going to use num1 and num2 as its parameters, and then now we can write our code. So we're going to say the answer equals num1 plus num2, whatever those are, and then we can return the answer. And now what we're going to do is we come down here, and like I said, kind of functions are like an extended variable. You're going to see a lot of times where people use a variable and they assign a function to that variable, and what that does is assigns the return of that function to the variable. So we could say x equals addition 5, 6, and then we can print x. So if we save and run that, we see that we get 11. Now there is no limit to the number of parameters that you can have. So you could say num1, num2, num3, num4 plus num3 plus num4, like that. 5, 6, 6, and 5. Run that again, and we get 22. And so on. Now, say though you were developing a website creating program, and you had a function that would create this website. Like, say for example, if you're familiar with WordPress, you can create a WordPress site in just a matter of about 10, 15, 20 minutes, because when you download and install something like WordPress, there's a lot of default things. So you have default buttons, you have default text, font, size, all this kind of stuff, colors, everything. They have some sort of default, and then later on, if you choose to, you can change it, right? And so here, for example, we can see we've got num1, num2, num3, num4, and at least with addition, it doesn't necessarily matter what order these parameters are in, but think about if instead of addition, we had define website, and then we had all kinds of questions like font, color, let's see, font, background, we'll do background, color, font, size, font, color, and so on. Obviously with a website there's hundreds of variables. But we're just making a simple one with font, background, color, font size, and font color, just for example. Now let me add this undercase there, or underscore. And then in this we'll just say print font, and actually let's do font like that, and then print BG for background, and we'll just copy and paste this. Copy, paste, and then print font size, and we'll copy and paste, and finally print font color and font underscore color. Okay, so, and that's spelled print, right? Print. Okay, so this function right now we're just printing it out, but let's say you were going to do something with it. You're going to create, all of these, characteristics to the website. Now, for a programmer, like let's say you've developed this and you want to share it with somebody. Well, first of all, for a developer to use this function, they're going to need to do like website, and then font we'll say is Times New Roman TNR. Background color we're going to say is black. Actually, the background color probably should be white, not black. Font size 11, and font color will be white. Or I mean black. Okay. So this, currently, if we save and run this, is going to print out for us the font, the background color, font size, font color. Okay. But like we were saying, with a website, there might be hundreds of variables. You might be able to see here that this could get tedious really, really fast. Also, it's worth noting that you have to, whatever order these parameters are in, you have to retain that exact same order when you define the function. The only way around that would be something like this. So if you did website, and we'll copy and paste this. So copy, paste. But what if we black to the front accidentally, and as a developer we forgot the order? So we save and run this, and now we see that instead, actually let's comment this out so we can see very clearly. And instead we have font black, background TNR, font size white, font color 11. Obviously you can't have a font type black, right? So this created a problem for us. So one thing that you can do as a developer, at least, to sort of get a handle on this is instead of, you can do this and put them in the order that they're supposed to be in, but you could also do something like this. You could say font underscore color equals black, and then you could do font equals TNR, and then you can do this background color equals white. And just for the record, when you have like a big list, what you can do is you can hit the enter key and you can bring things down like this. Okay. Anyway, font color, background color, and then font size like this. Alright, so then we can save and run this. And now, even though we changed the order a little bit, we do get TNR for Times New Roman, background white, font size 11, font color black. But again, we still kind of run into trouble here because here we only have four function parameters. But what if we had 100, literally 100? So some developers make massive sized functions. So one of the larger functions that I know of are functions for matplotlib, which is a graphing module for Python. It's highly customizable. So you can kind of think of it as if you're, building a house or something. The house has a ton of options that you could have with the house. You've got colors, you've got room sizes, room shapes, you've got where the windows are, where the plugs are, where everything is, all kinds of things, right? But you, as say you're getting a house built, if you go to a builder, he's not going to ask you. They're going to ask you a lot of questions for customization, but he's not going to ask you what type of wood do you want on the house, and he's probably not going to ask you what type of shingles do you want. You can customize that if you wanted, but he's not going to ask you these things by default, right? But if you request them, you can always request because you're building the house, right? And so he can customize those things, but in general, he's not going to ask you about every single thing, every single part of that house, what kind of wire, what gauge wires to use, blah, 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 blah. He's not going to ask you all of those questions. But if you requested them, they could be customized to exactly what you wanted. So in a situation like that, even though we're not building a house, but you can at least think of it in terms of matplotlib, where you've got color, line thickness, plot markers, font size, font colors, axes colors, all of this stuff. There's a lot of options, but you should at least have a default option that makes it very simple. Maybe someone just wants to do a very simple graph and that be it. Whereas other people are often occupied with making it look very good at the same time for presentability reasons. So that's where function parameter defaults come into play. So here we have to define all of these. If we don't define them, say for example we don't define font, when we try to run that, we're going to get an error because, lost my mouse, here it is, because we're missing one required argument, and that one is font. And so it's not going to be able to run. So as a developer, we can take this into consideration, and instead what we can do is we can say font equals, and we can say here TNR. We can say background color equals white, and we can do these enters again, so to save some space. font size equals 11, and font color equals black. And what we've done here is, see, we've created this function, website. So now what we can do is we can come down here, and instead what we can do is we can just call website. We don't have to define anything. So we'll save and run that. And we bring it over here. And now we see we have everything is already defined for us. TNR, background is white, font size 11, and so on. Now, as a programmer, if we're using this website function, we see that, we have all these defaults, but let's say we don't like a white background. We actually want a gray background. Okay, so instead, what we can do is we can say background color, and we can say instead gray, like this. And now, when we save and run that, we get here, we have everything else defined as we have by default, but then we were able to change the background color to gray instead. So, for the most part, if you're creating functions and they have a decent number of parameters, probably anything more than 2 parameters, I would say you definitely want to create function parameter defaults. That way, anytime you're using it or someone else is using it, they can just use the defaults very simply and only need to customize what they need to. Now, if you only have 2 parameters, for example, let's say you only had background color and font color, then you want to have to define them all out like this, because if there are defaults, you do have to type out the entire thing. Or, well, I guess actually you probably wouldn't have to. Let's confirm that with Python 3, however. Let's say this only has 2 parameters to it. You've got font and background color. Let's say we just do this. Let's say we do TNR and gray. Let's see if we can get away with that one. Oh, yeah, well, we got away with it for the most part. Font, background color. We just can't be printing these out. So actually, if there's only 2, then you could still define defaults and the person could still type them in like this. So actually, if you're creating a function and you're planning to use it yourself or even share it, it just makes a lot of sense to go ahead and define defaults. Now, again though, at least for my purposes, if I only have a couple variables here, I usually don't put in defaults, but if you're creating a function that has just gobs of parameters, and then it just kind of makes sense to go ahead and put in the defaults, and then that way the people can just customize exactly what they want. Now that said, don't forget that if you didn't provide defaults, when you write out that function, don't forget that you have to have exactly the same number of parameters and they have to be in perfect order, or you have to say the actual name of the parameter that you're talking about, but you still need just as many parameters. Or you can use function parameter defaults and then call the specific function that you're trying to change, or you can write out all of the functions if you want to. So, kind of a long one, chapter 11 on functions, but hopefully that helps a lot of you guys out, and girls. There are a lot of parts to functions, but they're extremely useful to use, and it's a good idea to know all about functions, parameters, and their defaults. So that's going to conclude Chapter 11. In Chapter 12, what we're going to be talking about is global and local sort of variables, because once you start using functions, you're going to start using variables, and you're going to somewhat quickly realize that variables don't quite work in the way that you would have hoped, and sometimes you're going to find that even though you swear you define that variable, you see you've defined that variable, it's not working. It says it's not defined and you can't figure it out. So anyway, that's what we'll be covering in the next chapter. As always, thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to Chapter 10 of our Python 3 Basics video series. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about functions. The idea of a function is to assign a set of code and possibly some variables to that code, known as parameters, to a single bit of text. So if you remember variables, we saved data to variables. Usually this was a singular bit of data, but we could also save operations, like this equals x, we could say x equals y divided by z, for example. A function is really just a larger example of that, where we save a bit of code to a singular, word. So just like variables will save a lot of time, if you find yourself, let's say, generating, a 15 moving average. So, to begin a function, or begin to define a function, we do def, which is short for define. And what this does is just notifies Python of the impending function definition. After that, you add a space, and then you give the name that you want to call your function. It's somewhat important to choose a unique name, and also one that's not going to conflict with any other functions that you might be using. So, for example, you wouldn't want to name a function print, because print is already a built-in function to Python, so it would be conflicting. So we'll call this example, and then after you've given the name of your function, then you can use these braces here and put in any function parameters. For now, we're going to leave those empty, but we will be building on parameters shortly. Then, to finish off the function definition, use a colon, like with our for loop, while loops, if statements, all of that. You'll hit enter and it's automatically indented for you. Now, this is where you type all of your code. So a function is just a group of code. So you can kind of think of any sort of Python script. You could take that code and then you could just indent it over, put it in a function, and it would work just the same as it always has, only you could call it with a function. So for now, I'm just going to put pass here. But just to show you guys an example, we could say, x equals 1, y equals 3, and then print x plus y. Okay, so we can save and run this. And the output here is 4, right? So we've defined a couple variables and we print them out. And then for this function, we just haven't done anything yet, right? But what we could do is we could take all of this information, we can cut it out, and then instead of pass, we can paste this information. Now, when you paste something, say you paste it like this and you want it all over, you could go through and tab and tab and tab, but that might get kind of tedious. Instead, what you can do is you can highlight everything and just hit the tab key, and that will move over everything that you've highlighted. So now, this example code that we've just written is encased in this example function. So now let's say, we want to run the example function. Well, we can come down here and we can do example, empty parameters, and then we can save and run that again, and we get 4. It's the same exact thing, but say example was doing something like, say, generating a moving average, a standard deviation, something like that. Instead of, even though both of those things can be done with an import now, say you had a function that does, something, say you've built some sort of spell checker and it just spell checks something. And so instead of writing that code every time to spell check data, you would just run the function itself. That way you don't have to keep writing that code over and over and over. So that's it for a function. Now a function can also contain everything that we've covered up to this point. So we could say if x is less than y, for example, print x y is less than. So we have an if statement here, and you can see 1 is less than 3, and so on. So you can put everything within it. Again, it's just you can put all kinds of code under a function. It's just the function is where that code is kept. And then we can reference that by just calling the function below or in your script. As time goes on, generally what you'll see people do is they make a bunch of functions, they define all of their functions and global variables at the top of the script, and then near the end they have a main function, right? And then, so they do define main, and then they run all of the functions and code that they want to run, and this is what would be known as the main loop, basically, to the script. So that's basically it for the basics of a function. In the next video, we're going to be talking about function parameters, so stay tuned for Chapter 11. Thank you for watching. Hello and welcome to Chapter 12 of our Python 3 Basics video series. In this video, we're going to now be discussing this concept of global and local variables. So when people start to use functions, they can quickly get confused when it comes to global and local variables. So you might get the dreaded variable is not defined, even when you can clearly see that it is defined. Now, the terms global and local correspond to a variable's reach within a script or a program. A global variable is one that can be pretty much accessed anywhere, globally, right? A local variable is basically the opposite. It can only be accessed within its locale. The difference is that global variables can be accessed locally but they can't be modified locally inherently. A local variable cannot be accessed globally inherently, but it can be obviously modified locally. Now, don't worry about committing that all to memory right now. I think it will make a lot more sense when we see it and do it. So let's go ahead and get started. So we can begin by saying something like x equals 6. Then we can define a function using def example, for now empty parameters, colon, and then we're going to say z equals 5. Now, x here is a global variable. Z is going to be local, but x is actually better thought to be local than global, but it's local to everything under it. So it's even local to this function, but you can't edit it necessarily with this function, but I'll show you guys that shortly. So define example, z equals 5, and you should be able to see that we can print z. So we'll save and run this. Now if you didn't call the function, like we didn't actually call the function, so now would be a good time to also bring up the fact that sometimes people might make a script and then run it and nothing happens, even though they've got a script here. This is because we've defined the function, but we haven't actually called the function to run. So either you would type example empty params down here, or you could also just come here and do example empty parameters and run that. So it prints 5. Now, this is where we can get into trouble. We could, after the function, print z, save and run that, but we get z is not defined. Well, the reason for this is z is local. It's local to example. So we can't actually print it out. We can't access it at all. Now, that one is a little easy for people to swallow, but here's the one that gets very confusing to people. First, let me comment this out. Cannot do this. How about define example 2, z equals 7, print z, but then we also want to print x, because we defined x up here, right? So we're going to be able to do this, so we can save and run this, and we'll run example 2, whoops, example 2, and we get 7 for z and 6 for x, because we defined x. But what if we want to do something like print x plus equals 1? Something like that. We'll save and run that. Whoops. Let's see. Print. We'll do x plus equals 1, and we will do print x. So here again, x plus equals 1 is the same as x equals x plus 1. So we'll do x plus equals 1, then we'll print x. Now, we'll run example 2, and let me pull this up slightly. Run it, and we get local variable x referenced before assignment. Now, this is what really gets people, because we can see that originally, even though now it's not printing x at all, when we do this and run it, example 2, we get 7 and we get 6. But as soon as we start trying to modify x, even though we were just able to a second ago print out x, and in theory in our heads reference x, we can't do it anymore because we have this problem of global and local variables. Now, what can we do about this? Well, the first thing that you might think about is you might say, well, what if we did, let's say y equals x plus 1. Something like that. And let's get rid of that print x. And then let's say print y. Because we knew we were able to reference x at least, right? So we save and run that. We'll do example 2. Whoops. We did get an error. For some reason when I typed that, there we go. Okay, so we have 7 and 7. Okay. Now, you can see here that we were able to do that because we assigned it to a new variable. So in this sense, we do have this global variable, but then we come down here and we were able to get the value of x, but as you recall just a moment ago, we weren't able to actually modify x. But here what we did was we made a new variable, and we just said that new variable is equal to x plus 1. Now, what else could we do? So this is really what's considered to be best practice. If you have teachers, or maybe your boss, maybe a CTO of the company is very anal retentive about things, this is the best practice. A lot of people think that there's no good reason to ever global a variable, but sometimes this can get kind of confusing, especially if you have a variable that you want to retain its value through the entire operation, and anytime you manipulate that variable, you want that change to occur globally. But just for the record, a lot of people don't like that. Now, what you could do is you could, say you want to eventually get this back to the x variable, you would just, at the end of the function, return y, and then you would say x equals example2. And then you print x, save and run that, and you can see 777. Very lucky program, 777. Now, that would be, again, considered best practice. But what if you still don't want to do best practice and you still want to do global variables as you maybe intended originally? Well, we can also do that, and we'll say define example3, empty parameters. And now what we're going to do is, up here, you see we have x, okay? And we've actually redefined x here, so I'm going to go ahead and move this function to the top, or right here. Let's move it here. So this is the first one that runs, and we're not touching this x. What we will do now is we want to use global x. Now, we can even do x plus equals 1, print x, save, and then we'll run example3, and we get 8. Now, print x, still 8. So now we're able to reference x, we can modify x, and we can obviously continue on using x throughout the entire script, allowing this function to modify x as we weren't able to do in the past. Again, I will just say a lot of people consider it not to be best practice to do this. Most people will agree that this is the this is the preferred method. So you don't want to global variables because it can cause trouble, especially in very complex script. Even though it makes programming the complex script easier, sometimes it can cause actually more problems down the road. So again, it comes down to kind of programmer's preference. Also, it comes down to whoever is your boss, whether that's you or someone else. So that concludes Chapter 12 on global and local variables. In the next video, in line with is not defined, we're going to be discussing debugging. So Chapter 13 will be dedicated to debugging just some of the more basic problems that you're probably going to see from time to time. Most of the time, I'll just give you a heads up, it's a typo, but you might have, indentation issues, you might have reference issues, you might define a variable or a function. I guess you might define either of those after you've actually called it, and so on. So anyway, that's what the next video is going to cover. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.